Hello, my name is McCormick, this is Peter Quale. We both work at Hale, and the title of our presentation is Google Penalties, a Diagnosis and the Cure. There we go. We probably don't need to go through introductions. If you want to know more, just ask us. It's not really that important. So, maybe you've been penalized. I put maybe in there for a couple of reasons. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. Organic traffic plummets, rankings disappear, you're dying, abandon hope, yada, yada, yada. Everybody's kind of freaking out because when you first realize that that cliff shows up, it's kind of overwhelming. You go through kind of the 5 stages of grief and eventually have to get to the recovery phase, which the #1 rule at the start of any sort of recovery process that you have to go through is not to panic. It's really easy, again, to get overwhelmed with not understanding where this is coming from, things like that, but just keep this in mind. So a couple of caveats before we get a little bit more in depth. Bad SEO does not necessarily mean that you have been hit with a penalty. So I think it was referenced earlier that there are filters put in place. It doesn't necessarily mean that you've been immediately hit by a specific penguin, panda penalty, or a manual notification. Natural selection just happens. Sometimes you've just been weeded out of the gene pool, unfortunately. Search results do change over time, so if you see ranks drop from like 1 to 20 or 1 to 12 or something like that, you want to look into what may have changed within results for your primary keywords. And not all penalties are actually created equal. So I threw that Matt Cutts tweet in there because he basically references a mild case of penguin. So it's almost like a cold or a fever or something, except, you know, it costs you money. And the other big thing to remember throughout this entire process is to document everything that you're doing. Because if you don't document it, you can't necessarily trace back what may or may not have worked, and you may or may not learn anything from it if you don't have everything basically written down. This actually came from Tom Critchlow. It's the first place that you'd want to start if you think you've been hit with a penalty is to Google your site. Site search is the first place to start. If your site doesn't show up, you have big problems, and you should go into Webmaster Tools and read what Google tells you to do. From here, there's does your site still rank for its domain name? And when you search for 5 or 6 unique keywords within any page on your site, do you show up at all? A lot of times, you know, it's really easy to get tunnel vision and only look at a certain grouping of keywords that may apply to, you know, your top pages. But if you're showing up for some other internal pages, but not for your main ones, there may be something going on, but it doesn't necessarily mean you've been wiped out of the index altogether.
That short link there goes to the right to the flow chart, by the way, so it won't take you to spam.
Yeah. So from there, you want to look into analytics. How much traffic have you lost? When did the drop-off occur? Use a timeline of known algorithm updates versus traffic drops. Look at Mozcast or Alguru, which actually both of them track basically weather patterns of Google algorithms through various collections of keywords and spaces and things like that. That graph there, the actual drop-off, is pretty much what you would expect out of somebody that's been hit with a penalty. It's essentially a flat line after a cliff. Sometimes traffic will decline a little bit, and then it'll go into a flat line, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's a penalty. From there, after looking into analytics, you want to go into Webmaster Tools. Make sure that you don't have one of these messages. If you do, it doesn't necessarily mean, it actually makes it a little bit easier because you know what you're looking for. You can focus on one specific thing based off of what Google tells you. And then, of course, when it's not a penalty, this type of gradual decline does not necessarily mean that you've been hit with something that's had an immediate update. It could mean something on your site's gone awry, something technical broke, you know, somebody's blocking the home page with their robots.txt file, which has happened before. But it's also important just to double check to make sure that you're for sure positive that you've been hit with something before you start looking into this. So Offsite Penalties, this mostly deals with links. Again, you go into Webmaster Tools and see that there's no message or anything, which is good. But that also means that your investigation is much wider than you had originally anticipated. So manual notifications do give you a starting point. Dealing with Google directly is helpful because you can resubmit your site, but it's also kind of a pain because the way that they notify you about some of these things is kind of ambiguous at times, and there's been a lot of complaints about their response time to some of these updates. From there, you'd actually want to engage in whatever backlink audits you can. Historical transparency is crucial. The first question that I've asked clients when I've helped them recover from a penalty is, 1, do you pay for links, and 2, are you lying? Which I've received various answers to both. But you'd want to dredge up all the link building documents you can. Anything, outsourced contracts, strategic plans, outreach lists, payment receipts, former employees, basically anybody that could have potentially built a link back to your site. From there, use multiple index tools to basically collect as many links to your site as possible. You don't want to filter out duplicate domains because they do overlap at times. But the index of Webmaster Tools, Majestic, Link Research Tools, Moz Open Site Explorer, they're all different. They all have different collections of links. None of them are 100% representative of your entire backlink profile, but the idea is to get as many of these possible links in one document. My personal favorite is Link Research Tools. It's a little, actually it's pretty expensive, but they lump together every one of these different indices together and basically give you a one-stop shop for figuring out what's going on with your site. Again, the more links the better. And then from there, evaluating your backlinks is the most crucial part of this entire process. Look for trends in site types. Are there industry-related sites? Are they general directories? Are they all blogs? Are there linking patterns with pages being linked, link networks, site-wide links, reciprocal links, things like that? I put Filipino mommy blogs in there because that was the specific theme of a bunch of blogs that were populated with exact match anchor text links back to a site that I was trying to clean up. So kind of an inside joke to nobody here because it was at my last company in Milwaukee, but it was definitely an interesting time, and it was funny, just because they were all themed the exact same way, so in case you're wondering. There are quite a few things that you want to look at as far as understanding what qualifies as a bad link. A few common violations: exact match anchor text. Are there a bunch of links from, in this example, car leasing to internal pages on your site? So if you have 773 links that are pointing to a deep page on your site that have the keyword car leasing, you're probably in trouble with somebody somewhere. But that's typically a pretty common place to start, is to look at anchor text. The links to domain ratio, 35-to-1 link to domain ratio is actually pretty bad. That means there's something going on with site-wide links, with footer links, with something like that. So you're kind of just looking for, you're kind of feeling out some trends within your own backlink profile to figure out what is and isn't actually occurring. And irrelevant content. So this is actually a blog post on exercising and staying fit, but there's links to payday loans. That doesn't really make sense, at least to me, but this is also something that would be pretty easy to flag and figure out that it's a bad thing and it's pointing back to your site. Most bad links are going to come from sites that have thin word counts and exact match anchor text. The only content on this homepage is this paragraph right here, and every one of these links here is pointed back to the exact same home brewing website. They all are pointing to the page that is descriptive of the links, so winemaking ingredients kits goes to a deep link and so on and so forth. That's about 50 to 60, maybe a little bit more than that, but the idea is that this is really bad and you don't want to do this. And if you see it, then you have to do something about it. Some other linking patterns include cloaked links, paid links, comments, and forum links. One other thing that you want to look at is who do the sites that are linking to you get links from, and who else are they linking to? There's not necessarily a there is a guilty by association type of rule. If you see a site and you think it's good, but Google will send you a notification and say, yeah, that one's, we consider it spammy, it's been penalized, you'd want to see who's linking to that site, because they draw all kinds of different correlations and causations between links, whether or not you're the top tier or the third tier. There's always a relationship between your site and then a site that may be linking to a site that links to you, which is really kind of confusing if you sit and think about it. It's very inception-y, but actually less confusing than that. And then segmenting out all your backlinks. So you've gone through this process, you figured out that you have a bunch of exact match anchor text, you have a bunch of bad links pointed to your site. You want to filter out what actually defines a spam link. It may seem obvious, but not all links are actually discoverable via the crawler tools, as I mentioned before, and sometimes Google will actually send you, if you have a manual notification, they will send you an example of a link that's not actually in their Webmaster Tools index, nor is it in any other index. So there's that can be where some frustrating parts come in. But generally speaking, you can cover most of your bases if you basically just take anything that potentially looks like spam and put it in the same folder and then deal with it together. So be pretty liberal with the definition of bad links. You don't want to organize it into a spreadsheet. The linking URL, the linked URL, the anchor text, the contact information. Depending on your penalty, you'll have to reach out to these websites and ask for takedowns and things like that. But the important thing here is to be as thorough as humanly possible.
So now that we've kind of talked about how we identified the problems, and now we're going to talk about what steps to take next. And that last bullet point on Jake's last slide talks about the contact, and that's oftentimes the hardest part to find that information. So there are various ways you can do that. The contact form on the offending website is usually a good place to start. Network Solutions can give you usually give you an email address. Sometimes they'll have an abuse at the domain that's linking back to you. Obviously, then once you have a name, you can track them down on other social networks, and if all else fails, and I've seen people actually do this, tweeting at them will get them to take their links out of their site. And again, document everything you're doing, because Google's going to want a lot of specifics. They're going to want to know exactly which domains you've requested removal from. And so when you submit the disavowal, we'll talk about that in a minute. When you submit the disavowal links form, you're going to want to provide information on which domains you've already requested. We actually had a client who had a former employee who we just called him out, and we couldn't figure out why we had all these paid links on there, and he moved on to a couple other, 2 jobs away. So we called him up, and he still had the spreadsheet from when he said, oh yeah, I bought links for 2 months straight, so we knew we pretty much had a problem at that point. So the disavow links tool, it actually takes about 3 clicks to get to this point, and they keep telling you, warning, this is really dangerous, but it's actually really not. Matt Cutts considers this kind of a machete. I think we refer to it more as like a sledgehammer. And the main thing to know about this form is when you prepare your text file, and basically it's just a long text file of all the domains that are offending domains that are backlinking to you, that you either can't get the links removed, or you're not getting any response from your requests. You upload that file, you can delete it, you can edit it, so it's really not that scary. But the main thing to know is you don't just pick and choose 10 domains or 15 domains. Literally, you want to take every bad link that coming back to your site that you can find and put it in that file. And we typically will oftentimes do maybe 100, 200 domains, things like that.
So the second part of this is any potential on-site penalties. You don't have anything going on off-site, you didn't get any manual notification for that. You can get manual notifications for on-site penalties, thin content, some bad linking and deceptive practices, things like that. The first place that you want to start is go into Google Webmaster Tools. I actually, in the next couple slides, I'll talk about a site crawler called Screaming Frog, which is basically, I use it constantly. But if you don't have a crawler that can get every single page on your site in one really simple to use interface, Webmaster Tools is a pretty good way to identify duplicate titles, meta descriptions, keyword patterns, index problems, internal link popularity, things like that. And of course, if you don't have any messages, or you do have messages, you want to read those and figure out what Google wants you to do first. So like I said, Screaming Frog is your best friend. It's been my best friend for probably 3 years. It's essentially a really easy tool to use. It's pretty cheap, but it identifies duplicate content, keyword stuffing, broken pages, links, duplicate meta descriptions and titles and things like that. Click depth from the home page, crawl directives, so index, follows. It does a lot more than that, and I have no problem talking about it for a while, but I don't think anybody wants to hear that right now. So if you have any questions or anything about the tool, I'm pretty well versed in it, and I'm, like I said, willing to talk about it later. But the site crawler itself essentially gives you an entire interface of all your pages in one easy-to-use spot. So you can get pretty much all your addresses, which would be here, the content, the status codes, the titles. It basically lets you sort and filter everything by alphabetization, sorry. And it's just a really efficient way to compile all data about your on-site content issues in one space. You will want to review every page on the site, so just because you're using this tool doesn't necessarily mean that you don't have to actually click and see what's going on the site itself. And even one page of spam or poor quality and thin content can hurt an entire site. Obviously, there are page level penalties that go along with domain levels, so it doesn't necessarily mean that the entire site's going to drop if you do have a couple pages of really bad content, but if you're wondering why a few pages drop, that's also a reason. A few common violations. Generally, 500 words is a pretty good length. I would actually say less than that, about 400 is good enough. Basically, whatever content is kind of that old college trope of how many pages do I have to write? Well, however many it takes you to get to your point. As long as the content is valuable, you're not really going to have a huge issue with length. But if there's no value to users beyond the keyword validation and the intent of the page isn't necessarily the same as the intent of the site overall. This was a page that I actually got to do a request for removal for a link from beer yeast here. This is a single blog post, it's about 150 words. Clearly not worth it. This was on one of those Filipino mommy blogs. So this isn't necessarily related to Filipino moms, apparently. But there were a ton of these that look just like this. This page is not indexed within Google. And it had exact match anchor text in 150 words. So this is kind of a pretty good example of a really easy to spot irrelevant piece of content. Keyword stuffing. This is pretty obvious. On page and off page it's an issue, but generally speaking, with the way that Google works now is you don't necessarily need a certain number of keywords on a page to rank for that keyword. In fact, the definition of keyword stuffing probably goes far beyond what it used to the point where there's not necessarily a density limit or anything like that. But just inserting keywords on a page without having them flow correctly within the content you're writing is bad for the user and it's bad for search engines. Exact match anchor text. At the bottom here, you can't really read this, but these are all exact match anchor text to deeper pages on the site that basically are Milwaukee County divorce attorneys, Waukesha County divorce attorneys. I worked with a couple law firms as well, so enough competitive research kind of gets you numb to some of the things that people are doing. But they're all index follow footer links, and they're really hard to read on the page itself. Something else is, these are both exact match anchor text right here to the home page. That content is on the home page. Does that make sense to anybody? I don't think so. So that's one of those things that you want to look for, basically an entire page. What makes sense in the context of a person being on the page, doing what you want them to do. You don't want them to click on a page that's on your home page, or you don't want them to click on a link on your home page that links to your home page, because that just doesn't make sense, especially if it has an exact match keyword as its anchor text. And the same thing, what do you do with this? The good news with on-page content improvements, and especially keywords and anchor text itself, is that you have direct control over what's going on there. It's not nearly as long and arduous a process unless you have a bunch of product pages that have duplicate content on an e-commerce site or something like that. But it's a lot easier to get rid of links on your own site than it is to get rid of links on other people's sites. So you want to get rid of as many of them as possible. If it makes sense, keep it on there, but if it doesn't, the odds are pretty high that it's not going to make sense to crawlers either.
It's important to note that this stuff used to work like as many of you probably know. So we spend a lot of our time de-optimizing sites, so actually taking keywords out of URLs, taking keywords out of heading, and just trying to make sites seem more natural.
Yeah, hidden content, hidden links, site-wide footer links, duplicate content, anything resembling this comment here is pretty much rife for a penalty. I think every week we sift through the blog for comment spam like this and make like comment spam of the day because it's really funny. And that actually used to work as well.
So, what do we do next? One of the most important things is knowing the exact size of your site. So, submitting a sitemap XML file to the Google and Bing Webmaster Tools. In this case, we're just talking about Google, but Bing has one too. But you can see that in this example, that site's way off. We've submitted a lot of URLs, and only a handful of them are indexed, so we know there's something wrong. In this case, it's probably duplicate content. Jake mentioned Screaming Frog. I actually use the Microsoft, which is a surprise. They actually have a pretty good SEO toolkit that you can download for free. And then we just go and compare the results to Google and Bing, like Jake said, using site colon your site to get an idea of how big your index is. And here's an example, and you can't actually get those numbers. Obviously the smaller the site, the easier it is to get those numbers to match up, but it is possible to get them to be exactly the same number. So if your site's really clean, you're paying attention to it, you're doing this on a regular basis, and by regular, it kind of depends on how often you update your content, but at least monthly, you can get those numbers to match up, and then you can kind of show off around the office and paste that graph all over the walls and stuff and be proud of yourself. So the best medicine ball, and Joe said it, Jay said it, is just better content. There are a lot of writers out there, and we've got to employ them to come in and lay out the strategy, figure out what audience we're looking for, create the content for them, and then improve the content of the site. And these are a couple tools that we use just for existing content. So a client comes to us and says, okay, we don't have a huge budget to rewrite our whole site. What can we do? The Hemingway app will actually clean up a lot of your code for you, just paste it in there, and it identifies passive voice, run-on sentences, and things you generally don't want. Readability score will actually give you, I think it's 4 grades, reading levels from 4 different tests, so you can kind of see if you have a highly technical site like your engineering firm, you're going to want to have a reading level higher than grade 9 or 10. You're going to want to be up there more like college level reading. And then writing for Hummingbird, Joe kind of broached on this. It's really writing for what are people looking for. They're asking questions, especially more and more as they're on their mobile phones. They don't have time to type, so they just swipe up and they hit the little microphone button and they ask Siri or they ask Google a question. That's kind of what we're using more FAQs on people's sites and really creating more conversational search within their websites. And so precautions, other things to just kind of think about in terms of protecting yourself. One of them is protect your IP address. So here's an example where Spirit Air actually has their IP address completely exposed. So you can browse their whole site at the IP address. More importantly, you can register all the domains you want and make it resolve to their site. So if you had a really bad flight and you get back to your hotel, you might get kind of bored in a hotel room and decide, well, I'm just going to put some nasty domains on there. I'm going to submit them to Google so they show up for some of these other keywords that they would notice in their analytics reports if their host header name is travisstewart.com. Or you could try and make it look like they're spamming. So you go register spammy domains, resolve it on their website, submit it to Google. Suddenly they have 2 versions of their site. We did all of those, so we've got 7 plus the IP address. So. Blog spam, another one. If you have a blog attached to, and Jake kind of mentioned this, if you have a blog attached to a big brand, make sure you're either not allowing comments or you're auditing them on a regular basis. Have them come into your inbox, check them because people will, post all kinds of bad links in there. And then content scraping. I don't know if anybody recognizes Harry Joyner there. He's kind of the e-commerce marketing or the headhunter of note, but he actually posted something on LinkedIn last week about how someone was scraping all his content. He's known for writing very, very colorful descriptions of his jobs, so it was very obvious. He was very upset, but as you can see, what happens there is, here's this VP of e-commerce marketing. Harry wants credit for it, but he's got all these other duplicates out there, so Google says, oh, there are just too many versions of this page out there, so we're not going to really rank any of them very well. So that's something he's fighting on the back end, trying to get these sites to take his content off of.
So general takeaways here. The penalty investigation process can be very time consuming, it can be very frustrating, but it's critical and it's actually fairly simple. And I say that in the sense that you only have 2 places that you can start. You can start off page and you can start on page. If you own your site or you have a pretty good idea of what's been going on over the past few years on a website, you kind of know where to start to begin with. The recovery process can be long, but again, it's simple to put these links into a spreadsheet. It just takes a lot of time and it can definitely eat up a lot of dollars. Again, document everything, even before and after. It could be an interesting case study. I know a lot of people have used that before. And recovery has no one-size-fits-all timetable, so you're basically on Google's watch. And it's also possible that if your site has been accidentally hit by a penalty, and I say that from an algorithm standpoint, it's just a matter of time until the next update comes out that your site goes back to normal, or you may actually have engaged in a deceptive practice or something like that. It'll take until the next algorithm update before you can refresh yourself and get back up to where you should be. And of course, fix your penalties all at once and as quickly as you can, because time costs money, and money is very important, especially if you run a business. So You basically follow these 4 things, and of course everything else we talked about, and you should be going for at least protecting yourself from dealing with this in the future. So at this point, just relax, and it's all going to be